Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavate Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavatir Naishtiki Om Agyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Mukam karoti vacharam pangam nangati girim yat kripatamaham vande Shri Guru Dinataranam Paramanandam Madhavam. So we are in the concluding part of third canto, chapter 27, which is titled Understanding Material Nature. And we will resume from verse 27. So 27, 28, and 29, we'll do them together. Yadaivam adhyatmaratah kalena bahujanmana sarvatra jata vairagya abrahma bhuvanan munihi madbhakta pratibudharto mat prasadena bhuyasya nihashrayasam swasamsthanam kevalyakyam madashrayam prapnoti yagyasadhira swadrisha chinna samshayaha yadgatva na nivarteta yogi linga vinirgame. When a person thus engages in devotional service and self-realization for many, many years and births, he becomes completely reluctant to enjoy any one of the material planets, even up to the highest planet, which is known as Brahmalok. He becomes fully developed in consciousness. My devotee actually becomes self-realized by my unlimited, causeless mercy. And thus, when freed from all doubts, he steadily progresses towards his destined abode, which is directly under the protection of my spiritual energy of unadulterated bliss. That is the ultimate perfectional goal of the living entity. After giving up the present material body, the mystic devotee goes to that transcendental abode and never comes back. So in 4 verses, 27 to 30, Lord Kapila will conclude the chapter talking about the final liberation of a yogi. So far, he has been talking about addressing the doubts of Devahuti, that despite all the effort, what is the guarantee that the person does not get again ensnared by Maya, does not fall down again? And she gives various reasons that the association with Maya has been since time immemorial. Maya is very powerful, and the association is because of the mutual cooperation between the Jiva and the Maya. And in the previous set of verses, Lord Kapila had addressed each one of these doubts. He had talked about the fact that the power of the Maya is actually given by the Jiva. Because the Jiva agrees to be dominated by Maya, she takes control. When the Jiva changes mind, then that power is taken away from Maya. And then in terms of the long association with Maya, and then Lord Kapila says that long association with Maya can be broken with long association with the transcendental. It's a steady, determined, prolonged association with the spiritual energy will break that association with Maya. Now here he is saying that he's also introducing his mercy. That it's not just the activities of the jiva. So what does he summarize in this verse? He says that kalena bahu janmana, that many births. And so we know that this process takes many births, and Lord Kapila is emphasizing that again, that after many births, and in each subsequent birth, he will pick from wherever he has left from in the previous birth. Such a practicing yogi will develop complete detachment, sarvatra jata vairagya. Including, how complete is the detachment? Abrahma bhuvanan loka. Right, we see this same term Abrahma bhuvanan loka coming in Bhagavad Gita 8:16, very similar context. Abrahma bhuvanan loka punaravanita arjuna mamupetya tu kaunteya punarjanmana vidyate. There it says that all the way from Brahmaloka to the lowest planet, punarvritana arjuna, place of repeated birth and death. But mamupetya tu kaunteya, that one who takes shelter of me, punam janmana vidyate, will not take birth again. So here Lord Kapila is saying that Brahmana Bhuvanam, that he has no attraction even to Brahmalok because of this reason, that they are ultimately places of repeated birth and death. So if the person is not attracted to Brahmalok, what is he attracted to? He says Mad Bhakta, that constantly worshipping me, Pratibuddha Artho, that he understands my true nature. He understands the ultimate truth. Now, is all that sufficient? Lord Kapila says no. He says, finally, mat prasadena bhuyasa, that by my bountiful mercy. So, even in Gyan, even in Astang, the mercy of the Lord has to be there, which is why a component of bhakti has to be there. Because bhakti is what attracts the mercy of the Lord. Without the mercy of the Lord, one cannot make any advancements, even within the material world. What to speak of moving from the material to the spiritual world. So, Lord Kapila is emphasizing that, yes, he says that mat prasadena bhuyasya, that ultimately it's my mercy, and because of that, nihashreyasam swa samsthanam. Because of that, he will attain the ultimate abode called Kaivalyakhayam. So one should understand that all this is in the context of the conception of this practitioner. Right? So the person is, for him, the ultimate abode is Brahman. So his Kaivalyakhayam, his exclusive focus is on Brahman, which Lord Kapila says is Madashrayam, that it is under my direct protection. Right? 1427, he says the same thing, Brahmanohi Pratishtanam, that ultimately I am the one who protects the Brahman. So once the person has been liberated of this material conception, then Swadarsha, then he has knowledge of the self, and Chinna Samshaya, that is freed from all doubts. And because of this, because of the fact that he has knowledge of himself, because he is free from all doubts, then na nivarteta, that he will never come back from there. He says yat katva, once having gone there, na nivarteta, that he will never come from there, which means that he will never take on a material or a gross body. And the reason Lord Kapila is giving that assurance is because the position in the Brahman is not like Swarga. So in Swarga, when there is Chinna Punya, when your pious activities get depleted, and they will get depleted, every moment that you spend, that you are in Swarga, you're consuming your pious credits. So ultimately they will get depleted and then you will fall. In Brahman, there is no such depletion. That there is no correspondence to your bank of pious credits and how long you can stay. So the jiva can stay indefinitely over there, as long as we have discussed two conditions are there, that the jiva remains respectful to the Lord, he does not blaspheme the Lord, which includes the devotees, or the jiva develops a desire to personally serve the Lord. In both cases, the jiva comes down to the material world with different conceptions. Sometimes they will come down, if they have become envious of the Lord, they will come down as demons, as rakshasas. If they come down with the desire to serve the Lord, they can come down as yogis, they can come down as devotees. Prabhupada says that sometimes they'll come down as devotees. Sometimes they come down as philanthropists because they have a strong desire to serve others. But because they have an aversion to the personal form of the Lord, or not really aversion, they don't have an attraction to the personal form of the Lord. So it manifests in communal service there. But factually speaking, very few of the souls fall from the Brahmajyoti. So even though as devotees we look down upon Brahmajyoti, it's an exalted place, and the jivas there are satisfied that they have endeavored after for so many lifetimes. And it's clearly said that they are Swadarshanam, that it's not that they are in ignorance over there. They understand the position of Krishna. They understand the position of devotional service. They understand that Krishna has a personal form. Understand there are devotees who have rasas with Krishna. They know all that. But they're inclined. That's their inclination. Just like even in the spiritual world, there are jivas that are in Shantaras. And they're actually witnessing the higher rasas. The trees, the kunjas, they're witnessing the conjugal pastimes of Radha and Krishna. But they're satisfied as a tree, or they're satisfied as the sand or the water. So it's not that they're unaware of it, but the jiva has their own free will, and they're satisfied with it. Similarly, these souls that are there in the Brahmajyoti, they're satisfied with it. When we say that the Brahmajyoti is a hellish place, it is a hellish place for devotees. So those who have that conception that one must serve the Lord, that it becomes a hellish place. But for those who are, it's like the difference between introverts and extroverts, right? That we were having this discussion about what is the impact of this COVID isolation. And for those who are more introverted in nature, this is heaven. They're happily staying at home, reading their books, doing their work. And then there are those who need to go out and talk to people, who need to have interactions with others. It's hell there. It's not that the extroverted people are not aware that there are introverts or vice versa. They're aware, but it's their nature. That's the nature that they're situated in. So these jivas are in that nature, and they're situated over there. One thing also we'll notice is that Srila Prabhupada so far, he has been commenting on these verses as if Lord Kapila is talking about pure devotion. In this verse, he actually expands on that and explains that this is not only pure devotion, but it's also speaking about Gyan and Asta. So if you notice, Prabhupada translates Adhyatma Rasa, Rata. Adhyatma Rata is basically, Rata means traveling towards or engaged in self-realization. Prabhupada translates it as devotional service and self-realization. And it's accurate because we already acknowledged that devotional service is important. It's a supporting anga of self-realization or gyan. So here Prabhupada also mentions in the purport that that one who is engaged in the devotional service is known as a devotee. And there is a distinction between pure devotee and mixed devotee. So what Lord Kapila is speaking about here is Mishra Bhaktas. So they're devotees because that's what they need to make any advancement. But that bhakti is mixed. It is mixed, Prabhupada says, sometimes with material gain, advancement in knowledge, of the relationship between the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity, or knowledge of the real nature of the Supreme Lord. But he says when a person is transcendental to these conditions, he is called a pure devotee. Later he says Swas Samsthana indicates that the impersonalists have no particular place to stay. The impersonalists sacrifice their individuality so that the living spark can merge into the impersonal effulgence emanating from the transcendental body of the Lord, but the devotee has a specific abode. The planet rests in the sunshine, but the sunshine itself has no particular resting place. So this is the contrast between one who is seeking a residence in the effulgence as opposed to one who is a devotee and is looking to reside with the Lord. The devotee, he gets residence in the Lord with some possession. Even if it is, I'm a tree in Golok Vrindavan, or I'm a piece of sand in Vaikuntha, but he has a residence, he has a service, he has a position. But for the jnanis and this kind of yogis, the only position that they have is that I am somewhere in the sunshine. I'm somewhere in the Brahmajyoti. In Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Rupa Goswami, he talks about three kinds of devotees who go to the spiritual world: the Sukha Aishwarya, Uttara Mukti. So these are the devotees who are primarily attracted to the pleasures of the spiritual world. Sukha Aishwarya, Uttara. So that is their primary attraction. Now, of course, they have attraction to serving the Lord, but that is secondary. And such jivas, they go to Vaikuntha and serve Lord Vishnu. So we saw that in Vaikuntha also there are different cadres of devotees. There are some who are right there with Lord Vishnu. Even in Golok, we saw there are some who are right there with Krishna. And then as you go outer and outer and outer peripheries of Golok or Vaikuntha, you see the rasas becoming more and more towards the lower rasas. And ultimately they come to Shanta rasa. So this is the first kind of devotee, Sukha Aishwarya, Uttara Mukti. Then the second is the Prema Sevatar, that they have the prominent desire to serve Lord. Seva Uttara, that is a prominent desire. But they also have a secondary desire for opulence. They also reside in the spiritual world, but in closer proximity to the Lord. Not really physical proximity, but the rasa. The rasa is closer to the Lord, whether it's in terms of the nature of service that they have or the pastimes that they participate in. And then the third is the pure devotees. They are described in Bhagavatam 6, 17, 28 as Swarga Pavarga Narakeshva Api Tulyartha Darshan. That Swarga Pavarga Narakeshva. That heaven, hell, or liberation. They don't care. Api Tulyartha Darshana. They consider it to be the same. as long as they have an opportunity to serve Krishna. Krishna keeps such devotees very close to them. So just because they say that heaven and hell is the same, or they say that send me to hell as long as I remember you, it does not mean that Krishna will send them to hell. Saying that, oh, you want to be going to hell, okay, you go to hell and you can remember me. He keeps them very, very close to himself. So these are the three kind of devotees. Next verse 30, last verse. Yada no yoga pachitta suiche. Yada na yogo pachita sucheto mayasu siddhasya vishyate anga ananya hetu svathame gatihi saya atyantiki yatra na mrityuhasa. When a perfect yogi's attention is no longer attracted to the byproducts of mystic powers, which are manifestations of the external energy, his progress towards me becomes unlimited, and thus the power of death cannot overcome him. So Lord Kapila, he concludes the chapter by warning of the possible pitfalls on the path of yoga. So there are many secondary effects in the form of the various enjoyments of the various stages of yoga. We'll see that in the next chapter. So Lord Kapila is saying that the yogi should not be attracted to them. So when the yogi does not fix his mind on this upachitashu. So upachitashu means abundant enjoyments. The Lord is acknowledging that these enjoyments are very attractive, and they have the ability to give unlimited pleasure. But he stays attracted to only ananya hetushu. So without any other hetu, without any other cause, he is only attracted to mayasu. He is only attracted to me. Then liberation will take place, in which death does not exist. So the power of death, mrityu hasaha. So mrityu hasaha is also known as the pride of death. So death has pride that everybody comes in its control. But for such a person who has overcome all these attachments, who has steered clear of all these detours, who is mayasu ananya hetusu, the pride of death is broken for such a person, because the Lord makes sure that he returns to the spiritual abode. So Prabhupada says that the yogis who have incomplete information of the result of devotional service are attracted by these powers, but these powers are material. A perfect yogi's mind is not attracted by any material power, but is simply attracted by unalloyed service to the Supreme Lord. So this is the conclusion of the chapter. So the chapter had 30 verses. It began with the first 5 verses describing the conditioned state of a jiva. Then from 6 to 11, it described how the process of yoga can help one attain liberation. Then verses 12 and 13 were the Sankhya part of the chapter, which showed how one can infer the presence of the soul and the super soul through analogies, by seeing the sun reflected in the pool of water reflected in the wall, or by seeing that the jiva comes back from deep sleep or comes back from annihilation. Then Lord Kapila described the nature of the soul without material coverings. After that, Mother Devahuti, she expressed her doubt about the rarity of liberation, that how difficult it is for a conditioned jiva who has had eternal association with the powerful Maya to liberate. And Lord Kapila addresses that by recommending intense, prolonged, and patient practice. And the result of it is that such a person becomes immune to the effects of Prakriti. And the Lord concludes the chapter by describing the final liberation of a yogi who stays true to the path. He goes back to Brahmajyoti, and then he warns that this path has many pitfalls. It is very long. So one has to stay true to the path, avoiding all the pitfalls. Okay. So that's the end of the chapter. I'll pause here and see if there's any discussion.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Two questions, Prabhu. One is Bhagavad Gita. Also, we learned that a yogi who cannot complete the path will live in the heaven for a long period of time, and then he'll come back to the earth planet in a very well situated family, right? And we have been talking about once when we go to the heaven, we exhaust our pious credit. You have been mentioning that. And so, whereas we know that these spiritual credits that we acquire will never get exhausted. So, what are we talking about there? How is the return of the person who is in heaven due to incomplete yoga practice come down? What is the reason he comes down?
He comes down because his bhakti is still not complete, and by virtue of the yoga, so we saw that when the person pursues yoga, the person is also accruing material credits, right? Because what is the prerequisite for yoga? That one should have complete detachment. What is the prerequisite for complete detachment? That at least one is acting in the mode of goodness, right? So when the person goes through that path, by the time they reach the stage of yoga, they've accrued an immense amount of credits. That credits is sufficient to elevate them to the heavenly planets. And the practice of the yoga is also one that it accrues, because as long as the person is performing something with material desires, it is giving them karmic reactions. That's the definition of karma, any activity that you perform with material desires, right? So sometimes we say that there is karma mishra bhakti. So while the bhakti aspect of it is giving us eternal benefit, it is also the karma aspect of it that is giving us pious benefit there. So when these get exhausted, they will come down, and because of the devotion that they have performed, they are given this ability to, or they're given this benediction to resume where they left off from.
There's one more question. If nobody else is asking, I'll ask. Otherwise, I'll first wait.
Sure, go ahead.
About the merging into the Brahman that we spoke about. Some people wants to merge into Brahma Jyoti, but we losing their personal identity. So, but we know that soul cannot be mutated or cut into pieces or like that. So their concept of merging is not like physically, like in the sense becoming completely one homogeneous with Brahma Jyoti. It's not possible, isn't it? Well, then
that is
just it's a conception.
That is true. That conception belongs to the Mayavadis. So they want to, when they say we want to go back to Godhead, or they want to go to Brahman, their conception is we will merge into the Brahman. The soul will lose its individual identity, right? Because what's the Mayavadi conception? That God is Brahman, and at some point of time, for some reason, a portion of the Brahman falls into the material world and becomes a jiva. And then when the jiva realizes his identity, then that portion goes back and combines with the Brahman and loses its identity. So that's the Mayavadi conception. In these chapters, Lord Kapila is not speaking about that. He's speaking about, that's why this notion of devotee is there, the notion of knowledge is there. The person is very well aware of the sambandh. Krishna, me, Krishna, Supreme Personality of Godhead, Brahman is the effulgence from the body of Krishna, I am a soul, I have an eternal relationship with Krishna. So that knowledge is very much is there. But because of the nature, they they want to reside in the Brahman and experience the bliss of solitude. That's their swabhav. Okay, thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. One quick question. Prabhu, there's a fine line between trying to understand Krishna, because in the Prabhu of text 27, it is a mixed devotees, or those also who want to seek knowledge about Krishna, understand Krishna, compared to the pure devotees that they just love Krishna and want to serve Krishna. Then to what limit, like we want to know about Krishna in a way, I think there's a very fine line between trying to understand Krishna and to love Krishna without any knowledge. Can you elaborate a bit more?
So you're saying there is a fine line between knowing Krishna and serving Krishna without knowledge of Krishna.
Yeah, it can be dangerous also, because to the extent that we want to know Krishna, then we become, like jnanis in a way.
I see. Yes, you're right, Prabhu. Knowing, knowing Krishna just from being like curious, it's still considered as bhakti, right? The four categories that Krishna speaks about in chapter 7, that four category of people approach me: arthor jigyasu and artharthi and jnani. So the difference between jigyasu and jnani is that the jigyasu is inquisitive about Krishna. They want to know about Krishna, not necessarily because they want to serve Krishna, but Krishna still considers them as devotees because they are not inimical to him. And if they get the mercy of a devotee, then they can also take to devotion. There are those who are just mental speculators, right? There are those who will simply read books about Krishna, speculate that people, one should do research about Krishna, one should compare Krishna with this and that. They really don't have any affection for Krishna. So that, as you rightly said, it's a slippery path. It's a dangerous path. That there's really no Krishna in the picture. It's just an object of research. Perhaps there is some kind of sukriti because it is connected to Krishna. Perhaps there is some kind of offense because they're looking at Krishna as a material object. But at least at that stage, they are definitely not considered as devotees. It is much better to serve Krishna even without all that knowledge. If one somehow has the desire to serve Krishna, and really speaking, when a person is serving Krishna with the desire, it means that he already has got the knowledge. And he has decided that this knowledge is not very important to me. Because we are just seeing the tip of the iceberg. We don't know what is the journey the person has traveled. Right? So, like Prabhupada gives the example of a newly married couple, that the husband and the wife get married, they don't really know each other. and then they begin to know one another. And then when they begin to know one another, then the theoretical affection becomes practical affection. That, the wife thinks he's my husband, I should like him. So that's theoretical. But now when she comes to know him, she sees he has good qualities. The husband sees she has good qualities. So then that becomes practical affection. And then later on, that knowledge is also not, the wife loves the husband just because he's who he is, and the husband loves the wife just because of who she is. There's no, very difficult for the wife to say, I love my husband because of this qualities and that qualities, etc. In fact, she might probably say that he has all these bad qualities, but I still love him, right? Because they don't even, it's not even relevant at that point. So devotee may have gone through this stage of trying to understand Krishna, know Krishna, develop love for Krishna, and then all that becomes irrelevant there. But that does not mean that he's ignorant about Krishna. It means that it is there. He has crossed that stage. He is at that stage of where he loves Krishna just because he understands the position of himself and Krishna. And if need be, they can manifest all the knowledge that is needed. If you go to some of the simple Brajvasis, they can talk very, very deep philosophy. They might be saying Radhe Radhe and they may be pulling a rickshaw, but you sit and talk to them, they can talk very deep philosophy if it is needed. I have personal experience of that. They may not manifest it, they may not care about it, but that knowledge is there. Is that okay? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. If we don't have any more questions, let's move on to the next chapter. So we'll start on the third canto, chapter 28, Kapila's instructions on the execution of devotional service. So, so this is also, and as I mentioned, Srila Prabhupada will often talk about this in the context of devotional service. The chapter actually talks about Astanga Yoga in details. So not so much, very little mention to Bhakti. Bhakti will appear later on in subsequent chapters. But here the focus is mostly or almost exclusively on the Astanga Yoga. The limbs of Astanga Yoga, etc. are described here. Srila Prabhupada still calls it execution of devotional service because the purpose of all this is to obtain the mercy of the Lord. It is Mishra Bhakti, but nevertheless, Prabhupada is, and we'll see that in the purpose also, Prabhupada tends to emphasize on the aspect of Bhakti. So the chapter has 44 verses, and the chapter will begin with describing the 8 limbs of Astanga Yoga, and then there is a lot of focus, almost 21 verses. They talk about how to meditate on the Lord. So it will talk about the form of the Lord that the yogi meditates upon. And the chapter will conclude about describing once again the process of liberation and the state of mind of the yogi and the thought process of the internal thought process of the yogi. So it's an expansion of Astanga Yoga that was introduced in the previous chapter. So previous chapter was Gyan to Astang, and this is an expansion of Astanga Yoga. And this will then move into Bhakti. Next chapter we'll talk about Bhakti. So just to take a step back and see the Q&A that's going on, the question and answers that is going on between Devahuti and Lord Kapila. So in the 25th chapter, Devahuti had put 4 questions before Lord Kapila. First, she had asked about a general question about my state of being one of bewilderment. So she said, please dispel my illusion. And then in response to that, in the 25th chapter, so this question was put in the 25th chapter, and the remaining 25th chapter, Lord Kapila, he spoke about Adhyatmic Yoga. So Adhyatmic Yoga is non-material, right? That one that relates to the spirit. And he spoke about Sankhya, he spoke about Astang, he spoke about Bhakti, and then he concluded with characterizing the superiority of Bhakti and the nature of a devotee. Second question that Devotee asked was that describe the process of Bhakti to attain you easily. And once again, in the 25th chapter, Lord Kapila had described Bhava Bhakti. That he said that this is Bhakti beyond the modes, and said if you're not ready for that, you perform Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, and eventually you will reach the stage of Bhava Bhakti. So the 25th chapter has a description of all the forms of Adhyatmic Yoga in brief. Sankhya, Astang, and Bhakti. Between Bhakti, he spoke about Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti and Bhava Bhakti. The third question that was asked by Devotee in 25th chapter was describe the process of Gyan. So she asked this even though she had asked about Bhakti for the sake of completeness and also to contrast the process. And also it is mentioned that the devotees are still curious. They don't run with blinders. So they don't have this sense, because once you're confident in where you are, then you don't fear anything else. Right? So if devotee is confident in his bhakti, he does not fear that if I listen about Gyan, then I might fall down. Or if I hear about Astang, I may be getting attracted to the Siddhis. Or if I travel in the material world, I may get attracted to piety. In fact, as we see in the journey of Gopakumar, a devotee actually goes through all this. The devotee actually experiences material bliss. He actually experiences the power of siddhis. So right from the beginning, they have developed this indifference to it. Not really aversion, but indifference to it. So devotee is not scared that if she hears about Gyan or yoga, she might get distracted, but she's curious. So that's why she asks about Gyan. And in the 26th chapter, there is a description of the whole process of creation, Karya Srishti, the Virat Rupa. In the 27th chapter, we just concluded, there is a description of the jiva in the conditioned stage, the process of attaining liberation. The fourth question that she asked is describe the process of Astang Yoga. So this is asked in 325-29. And in answer to that, Lord Kapila is speaking this chapter, 328, in which he will describe the process of Astang Yoga. So with this chapter, all the four questions that are asked by Devahuti will be answered. At the beginning of the 29th chapter, next chapter, she will ask three more questions. She will ask about that after hearing about Gyan and Astang, she will explain to me about Bhakti in further details. So in the remaining part of the 29th chapter, Lord Kapila will talk about the various classes of Bhakti, the various angas of Bhakti, characteristics of pure devotion. He will talk about offenses in Bhakti. Then Devahuti will ask about the nature of time. And that will be described again in the 29th chapter. And the last question of Devahuti will be the birth and the cycle of birth and death of the jivas. And that will be the focus of the chapter 30, 31, and 32. Okay, so we will. So I have summarized this in a table. I will send this to you, to Premakishore Prabhu also. No need for you to note it. Okay, so we will start with verse 1 of chapter 28. Canto 3. Sri Bhagavan Vacha Yogasya Lakshanam Vakshe Sabijasya Nripatmaje Manayene Viddhina Prasanam Yati Satpatham. The personality of Godhead said, "My dear mother, O daughter of the king, now I shall explain to you the system of yoga, the object of which is to concentrate the mind. By practicing this system, one can become joyful and progressively advance towards the path of the absolute truth." So as I mentioned, the previous chapter was Jnana Mishra Bhakti, and then the Lord began to speak about Jnana Yoga Mishra Bhakti. This chapter is Yoga Mishra Bhakti. And in the first 12 verses, the Lord will describe the 8 limbs of Astanga Yoga. So we'll describe Yam and Niyam in verses 2 to 4. In the next 2 verses, he will describe Asana, Pranayam, Pratyahar, Dharana, Dhyan, and Samadhi. Then how these processes can be used to control the mind and fix it on the Lord. And then he will talk about it in further details. So as we will see as these angas are unfolded, that each of these angas of Astanga Yoga, they progressively dismantle the person's material existence. For instance, by the practice of pranayam, one is able to destroy the doshas. By the practice of asanas, one is able to reverse the influences of the material decrepitude, like the decaying of the body. By asana, one can become healthy. The doshas are at a more subtle level that is manifested through the imbalance of the pranas, the life airs, and the pranayam, it destroys the doshas. Then dharana, it destroys the sins. One becomes free of the cycle of karma. Pratyahara, it frees one from material association. And then dhyan, it completely frees one from the modes. One becomes independent of the material nature. So Srila Prabhupada says that that following the system of yoga, one can become joyful. He's saying Lord Kapila, the personality of Godhead, who is the highest authority on yoga, here explains the yoga system known as Astanga Yoga, which comprises of 8 different practices, namely Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayam, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. By all these stages of practice, one must realize Lord Vishnu, who is the target of all yoga. Verse 2. Swadharma charanam shaktya vidharmacha nivartanam deva labdena santosha atmavikcharanacharam. One should execute his prescribed duties to the best of his ability and avoid performing duties not allotted to him. One should be satisfied with as much gain as he achieves by the grace of the Lord, and one should worship the lotus feet of a spiritual master. Right? So this is obviously the initial stage of the yoga, the yam and niyam. So when a person is at this stage, they are still performing their duties. So one should perform their swadharma acharanam. Swadharma is varnashram dharma. That whatever duties you have, one should not prematurely abandon them, but one should perform them to the best of the abilities. But at the same time, one should start developing detachment. One should be detached from the results of the activities. So we know that the prerequisite to Gyan is Nishkam Karma, and the prerequisite to Astang is Atmagyan. Atmagyan is that one understands the nature of the self, that I am not the body, but still the person is engaged in the duties for the sake of, and this is explained elaborately in Bhagavad Gita, that why does such a person still engage in performing of karma? Still there is some purification that is needed. Still there may be some desires. Even if there is nothing to set an example for others, the person still acts. And important point mentioned here also is that one should worship the lotus feet of the spiritual master. So one should take to this under the guidance of a qualified preceptor. One should not simply think that this is what I need to do, leave the house, go to a jungle, sit under a forest tree, and perform some imaginary forms of activities. Prabhupada explains that Swadharma can also be understood to be Paradharma. That one should begin to understand this. My real dharma is to simply serve the Supreme Lord. Okay, verse 3. Gramya dharma nivrittascha moksha dharma ratis tatha mita medhya dhanam shashvat viviktakshema sevanam. One should cease performing conventional religious practices, and one should be attracted to those which lead to salvation. One should eat very frugally and should always remain secluded so that he can achieve the highest perfection of life. So in these verses, Yam and Niyam are further described. So the person should give up conventional religious practices. Lord Kapila calls it as Gramya Dharma. So these are pious activities that are performed for material benefit. So after giving Gramya Dharma up, what should the person be attracted to? Lord Kapila says Moksha Dharma. And one should be attracted to the process of liberation. So the focus here is not so much again Bhakti, because Moksha Dharma means there is still desire for liberation. Krishna's service is not that much in the focus. It is there, as we have discussed quite a few times. Without it, nothing can happen. But primary focus is Moksha Dharma. So one gives up Gramya Dharma and turns one's mind to Moksha Dharma. So what are the preliminary practices when one has developed this orientation? Prabhupada says is Mita Medhyanam, which means that one should eat very frugally. It is recommended in the Vedic literature that a yogi eat only half what he desires according to his hunger. So this is also a symptom of sense control, because eating is one of the most powerful of the senses. The other powerful sense is attraction to the opposite sex. So both of these are basically the building blocks of the practice. So when one remains in a secluded place, the understanding is that one is also not engaging in the kind of association that you would do if you are living in a village or if you are living in a city. then it is natural to be associating and being attracted to the opposite sex. Also, Gramya Katha, materially minded people, materially minded talk. So one is developing control on the senses, one is developing control on the attraction to the opposite sex, one is developing more of an attachment to the process of liberation. Verse 4. Ahimsa satyam asteyam yavadata parigraha brahmacharyam tapaha saucham swadhya purusharchanam. One should practice non-violence and truthfulness. One should avoid thieving and be satisfied with possessing as much as he needs for his maintenance. He should abstain from sex life, perform austerity, be clean, study the Vedas, and worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So these are very much reminiscent of the angas of Gyan. Like, these are the items of tapa, swacham. These are all activities of mode of goodness, which forms the building block. That one should at least reach the mode of goodness. One cannot be attracted to intoxication and illicit sex and perform yoga. Srila Prabhupada condemns this over and over again. So one should at least have developed that the distaste for sinful lives, and that is the purpose of yam niyam. That one is elevated at least to the mode of goodness through the practice of yam and niyam. Like when we practice bhakti, what the four regulative principles do, that they elevate us at least to the mode of goodness. Right? There's in the four regulative principles there is no Krishna there. Right? You don't eat meat, no illicit sex, no intoxication, no gambling, but there's no Krishna there. But yet they are given to us as part of our initiation vows because they form the foundation, the basic block, that at least be in the mode of goodness. The Prabhupada says that the word Purush Archanam, Purush Archanam. Purush Archanam in the verse is worshipping the Supreme Personality of God, especially in the form of Lord Krishna. And then he talks about the other angas, that the brahmachari practices celibacy, controlling his sex life. One cannot enjoy unrestricted sex life and practice yoga. This is rascaldom. And Prabhupada is especially heavy about it because when he was writing this purport, this was a big fad at the time. That people would offer, would commingle yoga with sex life. And Prabhupada was very, very, understandably, very, very heavy on this mentality. Then he says, Asteyam is important for a yogi. Asteyam means to refrain from theft. And theft does not mean actually stealing, like going, it also includes that, but it is not restricted to only that meaning that you go to somebody's house and steal things from there. Theft is also, it's also atyahara praschas. That if somebody is taking more than what he needs, one who's accumulating much more than what he should, such a person is considered as a thief. So asteyam means that only take as much as you need to keep body and soul together. Don't over endeavor, don't over accumulate. Then swadhyaya is the reading of the authorized Vedic scriptures. And Prabhupada says that even if one is not Krishna conscious and is practicing the yoga system, he must read standard Vedic literature in order to understand. Performance of yoga alone is not sufficient. So this is going back to the point we were making in the previous chapter, that yoga has to be accompanied with jnana. One has to have an understanding of the self. One has to have an understanding of the nature of the Lord, the nature of the relationship. And one has to also have an understanding of what is the right way to perform Ashtanga Yoga. Otherwise, anybody can come and mislead. So a person has to read the scriptures and understand what is the right way, so that when somebody comes and offers the process of yoga, one is able to collaborate and verify. So Prabhupada says that the Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, these are the three ways by which one is able to verify. So that is why Swadhyaya is important, because Swadhyaya is the third leg, Shastra, by which one understands. Even in Bhakti, Swadhyaya is important. Otherwise, anybody can come and tell you anything. And if the person is charismatic, or the person has a lot of followers who are also foolish, then you would also follow them, unless you read the scripture and say, but the scripture says something else, and then you um, are able to ascertain that the person is bona fide or not. Srila Prabhupada encouraged his disciples to read extensively from the scriptures, so that they could have developed conviction in what they are being told to do. Verse 5. Maunam sada sanjayah stairyam pranajaya shanehe pratyaharas chendriyanam vishayan manasa hridi. One must observe silence, acquire steadiness by practicing different yogic postures, control the breathing of the vital air, withdraw the senses from sense objects, and thus concentrate the mind on the heart. So this verse is describing asana, pranayam, and pratyahara. It describes one must observe silence, maunam. That is actually a part of niyam. So the previous verse was talking. The previous two verses were talking about yam and niyam. One part of niyam, it is also in this verse, but the rest of the verse talk about asana, pranayam, and pratyahara. And Prabhupada talks that that people think in general that Hatha Yoga is yoga. So Hatha Yoga is what is generally considered to be asana. Sometimes it's a mixture of asana and pranayam, but mostly asana. Like if you practice Hatha Yoga, they will teach you various body postures. And they say that I'm a practicing yogi. But asana is just yam niyam and asana, right? It's just the preliminary stage. There are 5 more stages after that. So asana is a preparatory stage. Prabhupada says that one has to be able to sit properly, then the mind and attention will become steady. So because in later stages of Ashtanga Yoga, one has to sit for long periods of time. And if the body does not cooperate, then it will be difficult. If somebody has a bad back or somebody's knees are not strong enough, or somebody is sick, difficult to perform Ashtanga Yoga. The first is to take care of the body so that the subsequent stages of the yoga can be practiced. So it's a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. And then from there comes pranayam, controlling the circulation of vital air. Then comes pratyahara. So pratyahara is that you withdraw the senses from the sense objects. So pratyahara essentially means, ahar means food. Pratyahara means that now your senses, they don't feed off the sense objects, but they feed off the transcendental objects. Prabhupada says the most important aspect of sense control is controlling sex life. That is called brahmacharya. By practicing the different sitting postures and controlling the vital air, one can control and restrain the senses from unrestricted sense enjoyment. Verse 6. Swadeshanyaam ekadeshe manasa pranadharanam Vaikuntaya lila bhidayan dhayan Vaikuntha lila bidit Vaikuntha lila vidyanam samadhanam tathatmanaha. Fixing the vital air and the mind in one of the 6 circles of vital air circulation within the body, thus concentrating one's mind on the transcendental pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is called samadhi or samadhan of the mind. So this verse describes the more advanced stages of the yoga, beginning from dharana to dhyan and samadhi. Essentially, they are the same. They are all meditation, progressive stages of meditation. The difference is the focus. So in dharana, the meditation is fixing the mind on an object. So one may fix their mind on Krishna, right? So that is dharana. Dhyan is that focus. It is now in greater details. So when we're looking from a binocular, right, we can be looking at the form of a person far away. That is dharana. We see that form is very far away, the person, but we see the form of the person. We see the outline of the person, get a sense. That is dharana. And then these binoculars, they have these knobs that you can arrange, and then with that the zoom comes in. And then with the zoom, you can say, okay, this is the face of the person, this is the hand, this is the legs, this is the nose of the person. So that is moving from dharana to dhyan. Samadhi is that when you're immersed into dhyan to the extent that you lose consciousness of everything else. So it is concentrated dhyan. So one may be looking at the lotus face of Krishna, and one becomes so absorbed in the lotus face of Krishna that they don't realize there is anything else in existence. Right? So dharana is general, dhyan is zoom, and samadhi is intensifying that meditation. Also, Prabhupada talks about the 6 circles of vital air. So he says, so these are essentially the pran that are circulating in the air, body. So he says the first circle is within the belly. The second circle is in the area of the heart. The third is in the area of the lungs. The fourth is on the palate. Palate is the upper portion of the mouth. The fifth is between the eyebrows. And the highest and the sixth is above the brain. So this is in the crown. So one has to fix his mind on the circulation of the vital air, and thus think of the transcendental pastimes of the Lord. It is never mentioned that one should concentrate on the impersonal or void. It is clearly stated Vaikuntha Leela. Leela means pastimes. So Srila Prabhupada is mentioning that Lord Kapila is specifically connecting Astanga Yoga to Bhakti. So the purpose of the detachment from the material is to attach to the personal form of the Lord, the personal, the pastime related to the personal form. The Prabhupada says Samadhi is not an artificial bodily state. It is a state achieved when the mind is virtually absorbed in the thoughts of the Supreme Personality of God. So the point Prabhupada is making is that you cannot say that now I'm going into Samadhi and then go into Samadhi. But it is obtained as a byproduct. That because one becomes so attracted to the thoughts of the Lord and his pastimes, one becomes completely absorbed in it. Right? Sometimes when you see people are reading a book that they find very absorbing, then they lose consciousness of everything else. Or if they're watching a TV program, or if they're doing something that they really enjoy, they become so absorbed in it. As a byproduct of that, they lose awareness of everything else, even though it may be temporary. But that analogy gives us a sense of what is being spoken about here. That the yogi in the stage of samadhi, he loses awareness and consciousness of everything else because he's absorbed in the personality of Godhead. So in verses 2, 3, and 4, Lord Kapila, he spoke about the 18 preliminary items of Astanga Yoga that are there in the first two stages. So in Yam and Niyam, he spoke about 18 angas of Yam and Niyam. And again, I'll share this table with you, but just for the sake of completeness, we'll go over it. In the second verse, he spoke about Swadharma Charanam Saktiya, executing one's prescribed duties. This is Niyam. So whether it is Yam and Niyam, it's very relative actually, because a Yam becomes a Niyam just by phrasing it differently. Like if you say that Swadharma Charanam Saktiya, it's a Niyam, something that you have to follow. Then the very next one, which is Vidharma Cha Nivratanam, that avoid performing duties not allocated. That becomes a Yam. So a Niyam is an injunction and a Yam is a prohibition. But the important thing is to understand what the point that is being made. Then Deva Labdena Santushta, satisfied with what is achieved by the Lord's grace. This is Niyam. Atmavik Charanacharam, worshipping the lotus feet of the spiritual master. This is Niyam. Then Gramya Dharma Nivritas, ceasing the performance of conventional religious practices. This is Yam, prohibition. Don't do it. Then Moksha Dharma Rati, developing attraction to practices that lead to salvation. What is this? Niyam. Do this. Mita me dhyadhana, eating very frugally. This is you can consider it both as Yam or Niyam. It's a Niyam when you say that eat frugally, and it's a Yam when you say that don't eat too much. But in this context, it is appearing as Niyam. Then Shashvad, always remaining in a secluded place. Niyam, injunction, stay in a secluded place. Then we have Ahimsa, which is non-violence, Niyam. Then Astheyam, refraining from theft or overindulgence, Niyam. Satyam, truthfulness, Niyam. Yavadartha Parigraha, possessing only what is necessary. Right? This is the corollary for Astheyam. Astheyam is don't overindulge in material possessions. Yavadartha Parigraha is possessing only what is necessary. So one can be considered to be a Yam and one can be considered to be a Niyam. Then Brahmacharyam. Brahmacharyam is celibacy. Follow celibacy. Niyam. Tapa, austerity. Niyam. Socha, cleanliness. Niyam. Swadhyay, study of the Vedas. Niyam. And Purusharchanam, worshipping the Supreme Lord. Niyam. And Maunam, silence. Niyam. So these are the 18 aspects of Yam and Niyam that appear in verses 2, 3, and 4. In verses 5 and 6, we have the subsequent stages appearing. So in the verse 5, Sadasan Jaya, that attaining steadiness by mastering the correct asanas. So this is asan. Then Sthairyam Prana Jaya, controlling the breathing of the vital air. What is this? Pranaya. Then Pratyaharas Chendriyanam Vishayan Manasa Hridi. Withdraw the senses from sense objects and concentrate the mind on the heart. So it starts with Pratyahara. So it's obviously Pratyahara. Swadhishtayam Ekadeshe Manasa Prana Dharanam. Fixing the vital air and the mind in one of the 6 circles of the six chakras. This is Dharana. Then Vaikuntha Leela Abhidhyanam. Then meditating on the limbs of the Lord and Vaikuntha Leela. This is Dhyanam. This is Dhyan. And then finally, Samadhanam Tathatmana. Concentrating one's mind on the transcendental pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is Samadhi. So these appear in verses, these 6 descriptions appear in verses 5 and 6. Okay, moving on to verse 7. Eteranyashapati bhira manodushtam asatpatham buddhaya yunjita shankhe jiprano hayatandriyaha. By these processes, or by any other true process, one must control the contaminated, unbridled mind, which is always attracted by material enjoyment, and thus fix himself in thought of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Lord Kapila says, by this process or by any other true process. So he's saying there may be other processes. Vishnu Chakravarti says other true processes may be things like charity and vows. And Prabhupada comments that Eteranyascha, the general yoga process, entails observing the rules and regulations. And then he says the same concentration can be achieved by any other process, Anayas Cha. And Srila Prabhupada, of course, says that Bhakti can also help deliver all of this. And one who practices Bhakti, then because of the attraction to Krishna, the attraction to the material world, the contamination of the thoughts and the desires, they all disappear. So that's why Prabhupada concludes saying, therefore, Krishna consciousness is the topmost yoga system. Verse 8. Shuchaudeshe pratishtapya vijitasanam tasmin swasti samasina rijukaya sambhayase. After controlling one's mind and sitting postures, one should spread a seat in a secluded and sanctified place. Sit there in an easy posture, keeping the body erect, and practice natural control. So Lord Kapila, he first gave a bird's eye view. He gave a summation of the 8 processes. Now he's going to be speaking a little bit more about this process. So here he's talking about asana. That Prabhupada says that easy posture is called swasti samasana. That one should put the soles of the feet between the 2 thighs and ankles and sit straight. That position helps one concentrate his mind on the personality of Godhead. That very process is also reflected in, is also recommended in Bhagavad Gita chapter 6. It is further suggested that one sit in a secluded, sanctified spot. The seat should consist of deer skin and kusha grass topped with cotton. So in his purport in chapter 6, Krishna explains a little bit of why deer skin. Because deer skin, it repels scorpions and insects and snakes. And kusha grass, because of the benediction that was given, that kusha grass should be present wherever any transcendental activities are being performed. Topped with cotton, so that there is some level of comfort. Prabhupada says, person sits in a very uncomfortable seat, then his body will become too much of a hindrance. Bhagavad Gita has also said the seat should neither be too high nor too low. Should not be too high, because then the person will start thinking that I am too great. He goes and sits at the top of the mountain. He looks not at everybody around him, says these are all people below me. Should not be too low also, because should not develop artificial humility, should not get flooded. The practical considerations like that. Should be in a secluded place, because you don't want to go into meditation and suddenly somebody comes and starts talking to you, or other forms of disturbances. Should be by a moving water, because rivers are naturally in the mode of goodness, and so it should be on the side of a moving water. Should be at an tirtha, place that is connected to the Lord of the pastime, because of the natural influence of the Lord's activities and presence over there. Okay. So I'll do a couple of more verses and then we'll stop for any discussion. Verse 9. Tanasya sodayen marjam purakumbha grechikahe pratikulena vachittam yatha sthiram achanchalam. The yogi should clear the passage of vital air by breathing in the following manner. First, he should inhale very deeply, then hold the breath in, and finally exhale. Or reversing the process, the yogi can first exhale, then hold the breath outside, and finally inhale. This is done so that the mind may become steady and free from disturbances. So this is pranayama. Previous was asana. So 3 different activities are recommended for clearing the passage of breath. So puraka is inhaling, kumbhaka is sustaining, and rechaka is exhaling. And you could do it inhale, sustain and exhale, or exhale, sustain and inhale. So Prabhupada says that he explains the science behind it. He says the nerves through which the inhalation and exhalation are conducted are technically called Ida and Pingala. The ultimate purpose of clearing the Ida and the Pingala passages is to divert the mind from material enjoyment. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, one's mind is his enemy and one's mind is also his friend. This is 6.5. Atmaiva hai atmano bandhur atmana ripur atmana. The mind can be one's bandhur and it can be one's enemy also. So in the purport, Prabhupada continues, its position varies according to the different dealings of the living entity. If we divert our minds to thoughts of material enjoyment, then our mind becomes an enemy. And if we concentrate our mind on the lotus feet of Krishna, then our mind is a friend. By the yoga system of Pura, Kumbhak, and Rechak, or by directly fixing the mind on the sound vibration of Krishna or on the form of Krishna, the same purpose is achieved. The Prabhupada here again is drawing our attention to the fact that all these processes of Astanga Yoga are subsumed within the practices of Bhakti Yoga. So when we chant, then we listen to the sound vibration of Krishna, or if we have progressed enough, we can meditate on the form of the Lord, or we can see the deity form of the Lord and the effect of the pranayam, which is to clear the mind, is automatically achieved through it. Then Prabhupada continues that in Bhagavad Gita it is said that one must practice the breathing exercise, Abhyas Yoga Yuktena. This is Bhagavad Gita 8.8. By virtue of these processes of control of the mind, the mind cannot wander to external thoughts. Chetasha Nanyagamina. Thus one can fix mind constantly on the personality of Godhead and can attain him, Yati. So essentially the process of pranayam. So we know pranayam also extends one's life, because the life years are set properly. It also clears the mind, as Prabhupada says, through Ida and Pingala, that these are these are the nerves that are connected with inhalation and exhalation, and these nerves are also in the control of the mind. So we know that by artificially stimulating the nerves, you can control body parts, right? Like doctors will tell you that if your heart is beating very rapidly, then you can rub the region behind your ears, and that will bring your heartbeat down. And of course, there is nothing mystic about it. There is a nerve that goes from there, which controls the beating of the heart. So when that nerve is stimulated, it reduces the beating of the heart. So similarly, there are nerves that are going that control the agitation of the mind. Now, they are not physically accessible, but they're accessible through breathing. So when you control the breathing, Ida and Pingal, those nerves, they get controlled, and it's a more mechanical way of controlling the mind. Prabhupada says same can be done by focusing the mind on something else. So if the mind is focused on something that it likes, it's automatically controlled. Okay, we'll do this first and then we'll stop for any questions. A small short purport. Manochirat sayad virajam jita swasasya yoginaha vayav agni bhayam yathaloham dhamatmam tejati vaimalam. The yogi who practices such breathing exercises are very soon freed from all mental disturbances. Just as gold, when put in fire and fanned with air, becomes free from all impurities. So, so two things are done to the gold, or at least an analogy that is used, that it is put into the fire and it is fanned with air. So similarly, when the yogi, while practicing yam and niyam, is following the breathing exercises, then the mind gets purified of impurities. So more and more subtle. Yam and niyam are more gross. They're do this, don't do this with your body. Do this, don't do this. Pranayam is more subtle. That through the process of breath control, you are controlling the mind, but it's still a mechanical process. It is still a process that, at least in Astanga Yoga, that is not imbued with bhakti. It is basically a mechanical process of controlling the nerves that affect the brain. Yeah, I'll stop here. Actually, I didn't realize I'm almost over time. So any questions, comments, discussions?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, just one comment. When you say one can purify the mind either by breathing process or by the chanting process, breathing process is more, as you say, mechanical, and but it's not devotional. No? But when you chant, it's both. It's devotional as well, bringing you closer to Krishna compared to breathing.
Right. That's the point Prabhupada makes. That so Prabhupada's focus in the purport says that he constantly brings our attention to the fact that all these angas of Astanga Yoga, they're automatically achieved through bhakti. Like when one practices this pranayam to control the mind, when you chant, the mind is automatically controlled. So no need to practice pranayam separately. If you chant sincerely, as good as you're doing pranayam, better than that, because later on he'll say that chanting is actually as good as dhyan. So the same process, it gives you the benefits of all the stages of Astanga Yoga.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay. Okay, so we can stop here if there's no other comments. Vanchakalpatarubhayaschet kripa sindhu vyeva patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. I also wanted to let you know that Wednesday we won't have a class because my Guru Maharaj is in town, and even though he had a session today also, I didn't attend that. Wednesday I will be attending it, so we will see each other next Monday. And so Prem Kishore Prabhu, you can also send a reminder on Wednesday. There won't be a class. Okay. The Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you very much.
Hari Bol.
Hari Bol.